Professor McLuhan, I think you enjoy paradox. You've elected to become the philosopher of the means of communication, but don't you rather perversely refuse to communicate simply?
I object to the idea of having elected myself. I chose no such role. There is, however, a kind of feedback from certain kinds of stimulus that I have presented. Now, when I did The Mechanical Bride, I was presenting the ordinary advertising world of our time as a fun show. And advertising is one of the largest and most richly comic shows that we put on in our world. It is also one of the most talented shows in the world. And in the future, archaeologists, anthropologists, and all will study our advertising avidly for signs of an extremely complicated culture that we live in. We are completely immune to advertising. Do you know why? It's all good news. Nothing leaves us as cold as good news. Why do we like bad news? Why do we find real news to be bad news? In
Because
the press,
it tells the truth about the human condition, largely.
Bad news, not
Yes,
good news?
bad news.
The human condition is mainly bad news. Now, on the other hand, I suggest that the reason we like bad news is it gives us a huge survivor emotion.
We're glad we're not them.
There,
who were in
but,
that
but for the grace of God. Now, on the other hand, with good news, there's not that easy escape hatch. Good news, like advertising, involves us entirely and in a most disagreeable way. It says, unless you have this Chev or this Volkswagen, you are not living.
But doesn't it also set impossible criteria? Because all the girls are beautiful and all the men are handsome and suntanned.
I'm talking about
and all own big cars.
They're talking about the satisfactions and the effects of possession. Now, in other words, good news deals with effects. And the effect that advertising seeks is an effect of satisfaction with a huge environment of services. Advertising is itself an enormous establishment of satisfactions. In fact, most people would not know what the meaning of their possessions was without advertising. Advertising tells them how they feel about what they have, not what they should have.
What does advertising tell you about television, and I mean its use on television? Is it different, you say,
Yes,
in the way it is presented in a moving visual form?
Advertising on television has had to abandon the hard sell, that point-to-point contact, that direct message with the sort of Nixon hebdomadal hand raised. This will not work on TV. Also, what will not work on TV is bad news.
What about the news from Vietnam and Ulster, which we are seeing every night?
People turn it off.
But I don't think that's true.
Yes, they've discovered this. The sponsored shows in the States, naturally very concerned about their listeners and their viewers, have discovered that people will not watch bad news.
But you were
anymore.
saying just now that people need to have bad news
No,
because it gives them the satisfaction of knowing that they're not in Ulster or Vietnam.
No, all I said was that with bad news you can have survivor emotion. With good news you feel threatened. Your very existence is threatened by good news.
Well, what do you say then is the effect upon such situations as Vietnam, riot, war, by television? Do you say that those events are different because of television?
No, the viewer becomes totally part of the action. And he finds it so repugnant that he simply will either turns the set off or says, you will stop that war at once. This is what Nixon has discovered. His people will not accept his policies.
You said, I explore, I don't explain. Now, isn't that an untenable, indeed inexcusably arrogant position for a teacher to take up, and you are a teacher? You should explain.
I explore poetry. I don't think poetry can be explained, but I do think it can be a means of teaching perception. I don't use concepts. I use percepts. I seek to perceive, not to conceive what's in front of me. And perception is exploration. And you do not know from one moment to the next what you're going to discover. It's all excitement and all discovery.
You've also said clear prose indicates an absence of thought. This
clear
seems
prose,
to me to contempt for the intellectual processes.
There is a saying of Thoreau. He said, the snowdrift is the lull in the wind. The institution is the lull in thought. When you can't think anymore, you establish an institution. When the wind stops blowing, the snowdrift forms. But these are not cynical remarks, they're studies of processes. And the purpose of studying processes is to avoid various kinds of hang-ups, miseries.
The purpose of communication surely is trying to illuminate what goes on in human life.
Most people never communicate in their entire lives. they think that what they say is communication. The communication is the effect of what you say. It's not what you say, it's the effect of what you say. Most people only discover the effect of what they say when they read the answers on the examination questions.
But you would probably deny that you take a delight or glee in the fact that the printed word is, I think you would say, becoming obsolescent, if not already obsolete.
By obsolete, I mean that it has become more prevalent and more abounding than ever. The book has never had it so good. The printed word has never been so big or powerful as now. And this means that it is obsolete, yes. Whereas TV is not obsolete, and it doesn't have a fraction of the effect of print.
But you see, there does seem to be a central contradiction here in your
Very
theory,
good.
Professor McLuhan.
Without a contradiction, there could be no polarity.
Well, can I tell you what I see it as being? And that is that you've written about the world of electronic all-at-onceness, the global village in which everybody is gathered together by means of television or the new electronic media.
Telegraph.
And yet, there seems to me to be a fearful danger of loss of individuality and identity here. Now, your colleague at Toronto, Edmund Carpenter, has just published a book in which he quotes a small girl saying, "Daddy, are we alive or on tape?"
Yes.
Now, this seems to me most fearsome.
It's like saying, are we on the air? There's a sign in California which reads, "Smile, you're on radar." It's a highway sign. It's for the police only. Smile, you're on radar. And say cheese. Now, this means, am I putting on an audience, or am I just by myself? And so, when you are putting on a public, then you have a totally different image of yourself than when you are all alone. When you're naked, it's very different from being nude in front of an audience like a stripteaser.
But isn't this a serious danger that you foresee, this lack of identity, loss of identity?
Danger is of the very element that we live in the 20th century, and extinction is the immediate possibility every hour of the day.
Well, one's conscious of this, but aren't these the things to be combated? And
I myself would prefer a somewhat more relaxed existence. I never state my preferences because it seems arrogant to me to express a private opinion in a world in which you live with everybody.
But surely private opinions are those which in the end have influenced human conduct.
They may
change history.
You might as well shout fire. That's a private opinion.
If there's a fire, it's a good idea to shout fire.
Except that it creates panic.
But maybe panic is necessary. You know the story about Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde told of the manager of a theatre who went onto the stage and said to the audience, "Now, fire has broken out, but please don't panic, stay where you are." Yes. And everybody was burnt to death.
On the other hand, it might have cooled the situation sufficiently to get the people out of the house. I'm interested in that, but cooling is a process and hotting up is merely a target.
Professor McLuhan, thank you very much indeed.